Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of November 10th, and this is your Monday briefing. We're going to speak with Beth Bell about the latest on Pillar 2 and more. But first, let's turn to Andrew Pryor for the latest from Washington.
Thanks. I'm coming to you at 10 a.m. on Monday, and over the weekend, Senate Republican leaders struck a deal with 8 centrist Democrats on an agreement that should, if it's enacted, end the government shutdown that is now, at 41 days. The agreement is to pass a continuing resolution to fund much of the federal government through January 30th, but it also includes 3 FY26 appropriations bills that would provide full year appropriations for military construction and veterans affairs, agriculture and FDA, which includes SNAP and WIC benefits, as well as legislative branch. So those will also be part of the deal. The deal does not include an agreement to extend the Affordable Care Act premium tax credit, but it does include a commitment from the Senate Majority Leader to hold a vote by the second week of December on a Democratic bill alongside a Republican proposal addressing the Affordable Care Act premium tax credit, but with no guaranteed outcome, either in the Senate or that the House would take it up. So where do we go from here? Well, the Senate over the late last night did vote 60 to 40, which was exactly the votes they needed to move this legislation forward. There are still additional procedural votes that need to occur. If any senator wanted to completely run out the clock, this could take until the end of the week for the Senate to pass it. However, we're not expecting that to happen. They may take tomorrow off for Veterans Day, but maybe today or maybe Wednesday that we could see Senate passage. Then it goes over to the House, which will have 36 hours to call members back into session to vote on the package. And we'll see how long it takes for them, but that should be a little bit more straightforward. And then on to the president's desk, and the White House has indicated the president supports this bipartisan agreement. So it looks like we may see an end to the government shutdown later this week, or worst case scenario, maybe into middle of next week. That will restore funding for furloughed workers, cancel some of the layoffs that were announced during the government shutdown, and provide back pay to those who are required to work, like air traffic controllers and others. So looks like we may see an end to the shutdown soon.
Thanks for that, Andrew. And now let's bring in Beth Bell. Beth, welcome.
Thank you.
This is your first Monday briefing, and we're so delighted to have you here.
I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. So let's talk about OECD Working Party 11. They're working on a Pillar 2 permanent safe harbor and specifics of the side-by-side system. And they're meeting this week. So could you fill us in on the outstanding issues and what the concerns are?
Yes, absolutely. So just to level set for the audience, this all comes out, this Working Party 11 meeting is the culmination of a lot of virtual meetings that have been happening since the G7 statement related to Pillar 2 came out on the side-by-side system, but also on a bunch of other issues related to the side-by-side system and the agreement among those countries, including simplifications like in the permanent safe harbor, including things like the treatment of tax credits, tax incentives that we've seen roll through a bunch of diplomatic speak at, say, the G20, and again in the press whenever we hear about things that the Working Party 11 or on the political level, the government's working at the inclusive framework are thinking about. So this is the in-person meeting. As folks who have worked with the OECD a lot know, once the delegates come in person in Paris, it can be a pretty big inflection point. Everyone's in the room together. They can lock the doors. Everyone looks at each other in their faces and says, okay, what do we need to do to get a deal here? And I think, looking at the development of the conversation over the past couple of weeks, there are a couple things that I will be looking out for if we see anything come out of the WP11 meeting. The first thing is any news on what I'd call future-proofing for competitiveness issues. So should the US be exempt from Pillar 2, other countries quite understandably have questions about their own tax competitiveness. They have sensitivity to any future changes in the US system that might put them at a further disadvantage. Will we see agreement to perhaps in the future take stock on how both the US system and Pillar 2 are performing on preventing base erosion and profit shifting. That is a huge deal for a lot of countries at the table now. I'll also be looking to see what the scope of the side-by-side exemption will be. So it'll likely be, we are hearing an exemption of general applicability. So the United States will not be named specifically, but could other countries, including major economies like China and India, who are not Pillar 2 implementers, also qualify for the exemption, theoretically qualify for the exemption, actually qualify for the exemption, remains to be seen. Those are big voices at the inclusive framework. Is there any further clarity on which taxpayers are exempt is another big thing that I think a lot of folks have been looking out for. The G7 statement said that a side-by-side system would fully exclude U.S. parented groups from the UTPR and IIR from Pillar 2. How will U.S. parented groups be defined is a big question. For instance, there's no distinction in the G7 statement between pass-through, flow-through entities and corporate entities. And there's been an increasing number of comments and questions around things like sandwich structures. These are issues that I think WP11 has been grappling with. Finally, will we hear any new progress on the permanent safe harbor, like you mentioned, and the tax credit front? Those are two items that we know are important to other delegates, not just the U.S. If the U.S. is exempt, those questions become less important than they were, say, when the U.S. was considering adopting Pillar 2. For the U.S., other countries are really interested in those, and seeing progress on those, I think, will show us how much momentum we have behind a whole package.
Okay.
Speaking of momentum, what about timing? Could this be wrapped up by the end of this calendar year? And if not, what does that mean for companies?
Yeah, so in short, I would say yes. I think agreement by the end of the year seems likely at the moment. Governments and taxpayers, they really want certainty in this space. I think there's a bit of fatigue around the instability in the space. So everyone's incentives are lined up to try to get to a deal on this, especially given the broader international economic uncertainty around other policies like tariffs. The obvious follow-up to that, though, is what does that agreement look like if we are expecting an agreement? How much detail will we have by the end of the year? And I think that's why so many people are watching WP11. Remember, they're the technical experts. They're not the political oversight of this whole project. They're meant to be, kind of the people who dive into the nuts and bolts and how you implement these things. So anything that comes out from them is more on the technical detail implementation level. But it will show how much delegates have been instructed from their political supervisors to move the ball forward on this. If they don't reach an agreement, which again, don't think that's likely right now, but I think we'll be back in a place where there's quite a bit of instability, not in the least because the U.S. Congress is paying close attention to this. And Section 899, which I know we've discussed before in this venue, is always kind of waiting in the wings should the Republican-controlled government not be happy with what the Treasury negotiators have produced.
If we could turn back, sticking with technical, but turn back to more of a domestic approach. What's going on at Treasury? We understand that they were able to continue working through the shutdown and have been diligently going after regulations to implement the One Big Beautiful Bill. Could you catch us up on where that stands and what new guidance we might expect next?
Yes, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. OB3 guidance remains a top priority. We know that from comments from Treasury officials. And we have also seen Treasury issue some important guidance related to the deregulatory agenda that they announced and described in the priority guidance plan. Some highlights on the release guidance that kind of gives us a view into what Treasury is thinking about and prioritizing includes notices on CAMT, some really impactful stuff on beginning construction and energy, guidance on issues that we know is politically important to the administration. So the no tax on tip stuff, which the latest on that was just released last Wednesday. In terms of the crystal ball gazing, which I enjoy doing, and so does kind of the huge team of experts we have tracking this stuff across sectors, we can make some educated guesses. We know from Treasury officials that they plan on issuing 4 notices related to OB3's international tax provisions by the end of the year. That is partially because some of those items, like the allocations related to the 1-month deferral election under 898C, to get truly technical and a bit in the weeds, has a deadline of November 30th. That's needed ASAP. Guidance related to changes to the FTC haircut, to FIDE, transition items related to OB3's modified pro rata shares rules, which could interact with existing regulations. That is all on the table. On the energy front, the PGP has actually a lot of energy items, which is pretty significant for this administration. But I think what folks are focusing on at IRS and at Treasury are related to what we used to call the FIOC rules. Now they're called the prohibited foreign entity restrictions, and how those will apply in the context of tax credits. And finally, we know that CAMT and OB3 interactions have been getting a lot of play from stakeholders, also from, by stakeholders, I don't just mean taxpayers, I also mean Congress. So that is I mention that because it bears noting that that type of political pressure is often the thing that gets regs pushed out maybe faster than you would expect. We're always watching for the short deadline regs, meaning the regs that we need to have in place, this tax year in order to provide certainty when new legislation comes out. But additional issues can pop up because of political pressure. And so we are really watching for developments that might give us a better sense on timing.
Great, Beth. Thank you so much for your insights, and appreciate being with us. Thank you.
Thank you again for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And for our viewers, stay tuned for more on the impact from this year's elections and the government shutdown. And don't miss Week in Review this Friday.
And thank you, as always, for spending this time with us. Take care.